Pedro Escamilla's The White Cat, A True Story. Cats by their very nature are creatures who, despite being accustomed to domestication, never truly renounce their wild independence. In polite society, they present themselves as an admirable class, tidy, well-mannered, and with impeccable elegance. Yet, at the slightest provocation, a trifle really, they unsheathe their claws, unleash their fury, and abandon themselves to the most outrageous excesses, proving precisely what I am about to illustrate. In such moments, no one would believe that the hissing, clawing, kicking creature is the same animal seen moments earlier, serenely licking its striped coat with its raspy tongue, or playing contentedly with whatever object caught its attention, seeming the very epitome of harmlessness. But let us proceed. I had often told my Aunt Juana to abandon her outdated beliefs about black and white cats. Time and again I tried to convince her that a cat's fur colour had no bearing on its nature or temperament. However, a woman of a certain age is rarely willing to part with the notions instilled in her youth. One day, shortly before the feast of St. John, my aunt approached me, brimming with excitement, to share the delightful and intriguing news that a white cat had appeared at her house. "What on earth does that mean?" I asked, puzzled. "Have you never heard," she replied, "that while black cats bring misfortune, white cats bring happiness to the household they enter?" "But, aunt..." Here began a futile duel of reason and superstition. My arguments were logical. Hers were based on anecdotes and practical examples that bolstered her ridiculous belief. I cited Buffon, the famed naturalist. She countered with Saint Bernard and other ecclesiastical authorities. "In short," I said, concluding our dispute, "if you don't have mice in your house, I see no point in keeping a cat, white or black." "You're a blasphemer, an impious soul," she retorted. "You'll end up on the gallows." Her prophecy, pronounced solely because of my aversion to cats, made me laugh heartily. We parted ways, both frustrated by our failure to persuade the other. This is how some European congresses and scientific conferences end: irreconcilable opinions and no progress made. My aunt was married to a man who always allowed her to have her way and, in matters of cats, had yet to form an opinion. Don Antero was an estimable man nearing 65. Two things made him particularly notable: a saffron-coloured wig of monumental proportions and an insatiable love of hosting gatherings at his house. These gatherings, often for trivial pretexts, served to amuse him by watching guests kick up dust, trample the rugs with their dancing, and damage the furniture. When June 24th arrived, the feast day of his wife's saint, it was, as you might expect, a grand excuse for a ball. Preparations began 8 days in advance, though modest in scale. A barrel organ player, a couple of pounds of spermaceti candles at 4 reals a pack, and refreshments sourced from the nearest fountain. Don Antero's enthusiasm did not extend to extravagance. That day, there was an official luncheon to which the closest friends were invited. As my aunt's nephew, I had the honour of attending. It was during this meal that I became acquainted with the famed white cat. When I first saw him, he was in the kitchen, licking a plate that had recently held an omelette. I confess that such a mundane activity seemed hardly befitting of an animal reputed to bring happiness through its mere presence. Otherwise, the cat was beautiful, plump and glossy, much like the cats kept at monasteries. Nothing distinguished him from others of his species. My aunt, however, was delighted with him, which for her was already a form of happiness. Later that day, it was revealed that the cat's arrival coincided with certain misfortunes. A fine porcelain serving dish was shattered by the maid, ruining the dinner set. My uncle, too, had suffered a fall in the street that confined him to bed for 4 days. Not even a black cat could have wrought more havoc with its sudden appearance. I must note one peculiar detail. On 3 separate occasions that day, I found the cat stationed near the pantry door, which remained prudently closed. It was as though the animal was intent on entering that part of the house. From time to time, he cast hopeful glances at the maid, perhaps waiting for a careless moment to enact some hidden scheme. "Must be mice," I thought to myself. "The cat is just doing his job." It was the most logical assumption about a creature that, until then, had not sullied its reputation for honesty. The day unfolded splendidly. The luncheon was superb, leaving nothing to be desired. There was champagne, toasts to the happiness of the household, and not a single mention of the white cat, who, I presumed, still stood guard by the pantry door. At the appointed hour, the ball began. The barrel organist opened with the overture from William Tell, earning enthusiastic applause, to which he responded with a bow worthy of Rossini himself. The party was in full swing when my uncle, slightly tipsy from the luncheon libations, announced to the room that he would recite a sonnet. He claimed to have composed it 40 years earlier in the throes of courtship with my aunt, a respectable age for any poetic endeavour. Though dismayed by the prospect of hearing it, we found comfort in knowing it was only a sonnet. After all, 14 lines can be endured, no matter how dreadful. A poem would have been far worse. Don Antero left the room to retrieve the verses. The organist struck up a waltz, and the younger guests eagerly joined in the lively dance. At precisely 10 o'clock, the cuckoo clock, contemporary with my uncle's sonnet, marked the fatal hour. A loud crash was heard, like the sound of breaking dishes echoed through the house, cutting short the waltz's cheerful notes. Everyone froze. My aunt clutched her head in despair. A moment later, a piercing scream rang out, a cry of genuine anguish, the kind novelists describe when an innocent heart is pierced by a treacherous blade. The scream came from Don Antero. We rushed toward the door leading to the inner rooms, but quickly retreated as my uncle appeared in the hallway, his face frozen in panic. He emerged from the hallway, his face contorted in terror, his signature wig conspicuously absent. His bald head, pale as a summer melon, sent the room into peals of laughter. Oblivious to the reaction, Don Antero staggered into the room, shouting, "The cat! The white cat!" Blood streaked his face. At that moment, a hard-of-hearing, one-armed guest misheard the exclamation. Thinking Don Antero had shouted, "Kill the cripple!" the ex-soldier prepared to defend himself, convinced my uncle bore him some inexplicable grudge. In his attempt to strike back, he accidentally hit a lady, knocking out 2 teeth and a molar. Her husband, incensed, lunged at the man, sending him tumbling to the floor. In his fall, he grabbed the organist, who collapsed with his instrument. The room descended into chaos. Guests screamed. Don Antero continued his cries of "the white cat," and the indignant guest shouted from the floor, "Why does this old fool want to kill me?" It was soon discovered that the white cat had slipped into the pantry in search of leftover roast. Startled by the cook, it leapt onto a shelf, knocking over a stack of dishes. Hearing the commotion, Don Antero rushed to investigate. Startled, the cat leapt at him, scratching his face and dislodging his wig. Believing himself under attack by every cat in the neighbourhood, Don Antero fled to the ballroom, where the hard-of-hearing guests' misinterpretation caused the rest. The next day, the white cat was expelled from the house, and my aunt reconsidered her beliefs about black and white cats.